Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining. I'll kick off even though we've still got people coming in. So for those who have not been part of this series or have not been able to make the previous sessions, at the beginning or earlier in the year, we set out a set of goals for accelerated breeding, 8 in total. The 8th one was for the cross-cutting team to work on and describe their deliverables and plans for the year. And the other 7 were for the crop teams. And these goals built heavily on discussions and insights and conclusions from the Dubai meeting back in October last year in Dubai. And so we took those insights and we'll just ask people mute themselves, please. And then developed a draft set of goals for the breeding teams to really own themselves and for it to be their set of goals for the year. And these were then ran past. There we go. These were ran past the breeding leads for their endorsement, and they agreed, yes, these are indeed the things that we need to be working on. And so following from that higher level discussion where we discussed all goals in one session, we're now going through systematically each one to discuss in detail with a broader audience, with you, the details and what's really involved in making progress against each of these and really making sure that they're well understood. So that's the process, and now we are up to accelerated breeding goal number 7, which is really all about the Transform high level output and the work that Transform has been working on with improved partnerships. I could say more about how these have specifically come about, but I don't want to steal Bish's thunder. And so with that, I will hand it over to Bish. Thank you, Bish.
Okay. Thanks very much, Michael. Let me start by sharing some slides that we have for this session. Just give me a second to do that. Okay, so I think I'm sharing some slides. They should be popping up, probably not in the slide share mode. Let me do that. Okay, and I'll get my laser pen ready also. Okay, good. Is it coming okay, Michael? Is it clear?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Michael. So yeah, as Michael said, we've been having a series of calls to describe the breeding goals, the goals for accelerated breeding. I think he has just referred to some of the text that you're seeing now. So we are now excitingly on goal number 7, just one left to go, and I will try my best now to go over this goal and the various sub goals that we have. So the overall goal so the goal number 7 is strengthening the regional partnerships and our breeding partnerships. I'm Bish. I recognize a lot of people on the call. I think we've interacted together a lot. It's good to see many of you on the call. A lot of what I'm going to talk about, many of you might already be quite familiar with because we've covered it quite extensively in the last 3 years through genetic innovations. But even prior to that, when we had excellence in breeding, we started talking about many of these things. So what I'm going to do now is go through 7 sub-goals first, so just to highlight them for the group. And like I said, many of you might be familiar with many of them already. And then I'm going to go into each of them in a little bit more detail. So if you have questions or concerns as we're going through them, just raise your hands. I can see some faces and names. So Michael, if you could help with moderating, or if you want to wait till the end, that's fine as well. And sometimes as we go through the slides, maybe some of your questions will be answered. So I'm going to go through now the 7 sub goals that are up here. So the first one is around defining networks. So making sure we're defining networks properly, prioritizing the countries that we're going to work with, where we're going to have impact, and then within those countries, identifying the key partners to work with. So this reflects back on some of the sessions we've had previously, where prioritization came up as a very important thing. In this particular context, we're really highlighting the prioritization of countries where we want to operate. Once that's done, together with these country teams and the institutions, we then need to identify common breeding priorities and ensure they're jointly defined and the most impactful value propositions for regional target product profiles are defined. The second sub goal is to ensure that advancement decisions that we're making in our breeding work are jointly discussed and agreed with regional partners. So again, go into more detail as we progress in the presentation. The third is to make sure regional technical planning is very inclusive. So these are technical things that we do in breeding, so making new crosses, establishing a phenotyping network, deciding where we're going to screen for certain traits and so on. So we need to be much more intentional about involving our partners and making joint decisions there. The fourth one is having alignment with our scaling partners. So in cases where we have limited number of scaling partners, we need to be much more intentional about identifying and working with a wider range of scaling partners so that the extensive, expensive, and hard work that we do in breeding has a channel for delivery. It has a way to reach the end user. In cases where there is no effective scaling system, we need to decide, do we still need to breed for those particular market segments? Or is a better use of the limited resources we have, is that better spent developing some kind of seed system or delivery channel before we reinvest in breeding? So of course, we'd like to do both, but we know our resources are limited and sometimes we need to make these difficult and strategic decisions. The fifth one is to have standardized network agreements implemented with our priority partners. I'll go into a bit more detail about that as we move along. The sixth one is ensuring that on a network level, we have a handle and a strong grip on operational costs. So this is important as we augment roles of partners. We need to understand clearly, how much funds are required for partners to implement certain functions. But increasingly, the funders, like the Gates Foundation, for instance, our big funders for breeding, are asking us. They're saying, okay, for this particular pipeline to deliver this number of products, what is the level of investment that is needed? And that's why this costing work is quite critical. And the final sub goal is to ensure that a certain percentage of our network funds and grants and so on are being directed to our partners. So usually these are the NARs, but we might have other scaling partners and seed systems. Sometimes we work with universities and so on. And again, this is critical for various reasons that I'll come into briefly in a short while. So where do we, where is a lot of this information that is happening? Where is it reported? It all has to be reported in the breeding portal. So that's the central point where all this information, all this work that is being generated needs to be reported so that it is visible at the end of the year for reporting, both for B4T, but for the various funders. If you need support in that process, the team is available. The Transform team and the Enable team are available. So myself, many of you know Lenin Muzundire, Dragan Milic, Vish Banda, and we have which is the core team, and then we have an expanded team as well. So at this point, you might be wondering, what magic box do we pull these sub goals out of? No, there is no magic box. These sub goals were co-defined with partners after extensive consultation. So we've been having consultations with over 30 national programs, mostly in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, where most of the Gates investments have been focused. but also in Siwana and other regions. During GI, that's 2022 to 2024, we actually had 4 formal meetings that many of you even participated in, where we brought leadership from national systems, from the funders, CGIAR leadership, often DDGs, directors of research, participants from sub-regional organizations, and the funders themselves. The Gates Foundation, for instance, participated in all these meetings. And we sat together and said, look, how can we strengthen partnerships? We acknowledge that breeding partnerships have existed in the CG for over 50 years, but in the spirit of continuous improvement, how can we improve further, and what are the areas that are causing some friction at the moment? And those were discussed very candidly, and follow-up action points were documented in 8 memoirs, and they were signed off at the highest level. So in the case of GI, by Sonia Vermeulen herself. So what came out of these discussions in Nairobi, Marrakesh, Dubai, Istanbul? We identified 8 key priority areas that are required for improvement of partnerships. So the first one was a need for better co-creation and increased alignment with national and regional priorities. So partners told us very clearly, look, CG does a lot of fantastic work, but you need to be more intentional about aligning with our national priorities and what we want to do regionally. Partners are asking for a bigger role in regional networks. They say, yeah, look, we've worked with you for a very long time. We're very grateful for all the capacity development, but we're now at a stage where we feel we can do some of these things. And we need to recognize that where capacity exists, where a partner might have a comparative advantage, now we must delegate that role to the partner. And there's a huge amount of work to do. And, we can then focus our resources and money and effort and staff time on something else. Better attribution. This actually came from both sides. NARS wanted better attribution for their contribution to regional breeding efforts. But CG leaders also said we need to be better attributed. When varieties are coded and released, we need to understand what has happened to our germplasm. We need to report that back to our funders to show impact and so on. So this works both ways. Same with funding transparency. So partners asking us to be more transparent about how regional network funds are being used. But CG leadership is equally asking partners, say, okay, look, if you have other projects that are supporting similar activities, we need to know about that and avoid duplication. Joint ownership and decision-making about how resources are allocated, about how technical decisions are being made. A need for an annual partnership health check. So they said these meetings that we've been having are good to brainstorm and identify pain points, but we need to institutionalize this and have an annual health check, partnership health check, where we can track how things are improving or not improving over time. And then finally, the final 2 bits are that we need to be a little bit more intentional of expanding our partner base in regional networks. This strongly came from the sub-regional organizations, the likes of CORAF, AGRA, and so on. They said usually our default partners are the NARS, but we've been informed that in some cases, it might be more strategic to partner with a university or a seed company, depending on the country and the crop. And then finally, a renewed focus on human capacity development. So these are the priorities that we got after extensive consultation, as I said, over 8 years, more or less, and then some very deliberate high-level meetings with leadership from various institutions. But as you can see, they're pretty abstract, right? So co-creation, increased alignment with national priorities. What we have tried to do as we establish the sub-goals is to try and convert some of these very abstract things into tangible things that we can implement in a practical breeding program. And we also wanted to marry those tangible activities with a modernization effort. So an example would be, for instance, the co-creation and increased alignment with national priorities. So this can be very nebulous. I mean, what does this actually mean? How can we act on this? And as many of you know, you've participated in this process that we established of having product design team meetings in individual countries, understanding from the country teams what their priorities are, what their market segments are, what their breeding priorities are, and then having that information inform CG market segments and target product profiles so that we are actively reacting and aligning to those national priorities. So that's a way of translating something rather abstract into something that's tangible and actionable, and also marrying it with a modernization effort. Because for many of these countries, establishing, defining a market segment and then populating a target product profile, it's a new thing. But we all know as modern breeding organizations that this is fundamental. We need to identify breeding priorities and have target product profiles to help guide our breeding and help prioritize. So it combines the two. So we're trying to make these recommendations actionable. That's what the sub goals are, while introducing an element of modernization. So before I go into the sub goals again, I just want to reflect a little bit on the regional crop networks. I'm fully aware that partnerships are nothing new, and all of us have been working in partnerships with organizations for a very long time. But let's just take stock of that a little bit. We know partnerships are vital. The CG, we can't do everything. We have a limited mandate. And given our very ambitious goals, food security in the global south, it's a huge challenge. We just simply don't have the human capacity to address the whole thing. So we need to work strategically with partners to ensure that the work that we're doing in breeding, seed systems, marketing actually then eventually has impact. But that means, again, we need to prioritize. We need to choose the right partners in the right locations. We need to identify which partners have a comparative advantage and then enable those partners to take on those roles so that we can free up some space and time to address some other challenge. As I said, solving food security in the global south, it's a huge problem. So there's always going to be something for CGIAR scientists to be addressing, and where partners have a comparative advantage, let us allow them to take ownership of that and move with it. The final thing I want to reflect on a little bit before going into the sub goals is some of the common elements we see in strong partnerships. So, myself and the team have interacted with many regional networks now in the CG, and there are many examples of very strong partnerships. And there's some common elements that we see in many of these partnerships. And the first one is they're always intentional. So partnerships don't just form out of the air, out of nothing. They have to be intentional. People need to be driving this. They need to be making an effort to build trust, to link people, to exchange information, to communicate, and so on. So we need to be intentional about this. We always see in good partnerships that there is alignment around common goals. So whichever network member you talk to, often all of them are talking about the same priorities. They say, yeah, this is our goal. This is our target for this year. We want to address this aflatoxin issue. We want to increase drought. Everyone's talking the common language and they're aligned around a common goal. Strong partnerships rely on trust through transparency. Everyone understands, how funds are spent, how roles are being distributed, and so on. They require institutional support. So that's another feature that we see. So it is beyond the staff and the scientists that you're working with in individual centers, because they are often temporary, and we know there's a lot of turnover in many institutions, including within the CGIAR. So we need to institutionalize many aspects of the partnership so that they are not affected by changes in personnel. And then finally, we need to have a commitment to shared metrics. And this is particularly important for us because we want to have shared metrics, and we want to also have a common platform, the breeding portal, where we want to report and capture all of these shared metrics from. So let me go into the sub-goal 1. So that is establishing the network. So firstly, identifying the partners and then defining what are the common goals for the regional crop networks. So the first one is, who should we work with? Which countries do we need to work with? And we've established a system that many of you are familiar with, where we help networks prioritize countries to work with based on primarily the income level, the World Bank income level. So the World Bank classifies countries according to 4 income levels, so high income, upper middle income, lower middle income, and then low income. And our focus is really on the low income and lower middle income countries. And then tied to that is the hectarage of the crop in those particular countries. So anything that is a low income or low middle income country that has over 1 million hectares of the crop is classified as a level 1 country. So it can be 1 million hectares of the crop, either it is actually 1 million hectares in practice, or it could be 1 million hectares based on value adjustment. So this is an index that has been developed by the market intelligence team and the team behind Glomip. They've explained it to me. I think it's not very complicated, but my math skills let me down. It's difficult for me to explain it. But what they do is they look at the production value of a particular crop, and then they make an adjustment to the hectareage based on that. So hypothetically, you could have a crop that only has 300,000 hectares. In actuality, often RTB crops are in that category. But because of the value adjustment, the equivalent when it is standardized with other crops is over 1 million hectares. So if a particular crop has over 1 million hectares in actuality or by value adjustment, it can be classified as a level 1 country. A level 2 is where it is between 250,000 hectares and 1 million. Level 3 is below 250,000. And then we have a 4th category, which is the self-supported. So these are partners in high income or upper middle income countries. And the expectation there is that they should be able to, they can be part of these networks, but they need to self-fund their participation. In much of Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, we don't find these. An exception is, for instance, South Africa in Sub-Saharan Africa. So South Africa can participate in a regional maize network, for instance, but we do know that South Africa has a very highly developed agricultural industry. It's a lot of investment from the private sector. It has a strong national system. So if they want to participate in capacity development, if they want to evaluate germplasm coming out of these regional networks, they should do so at their own cost. We should not be subsidizing them to do that, to evaluate trials, run trials, to attend capacity development meetings and so forth. So this is the system of prioritization, again, linking back to the previous calls that have been had, where prioritization in different aspects is critical. We just simply, we don't have the bandwidth to work with everyone. If we're talking about yam, for example, in West Africa, we can't work in 20 countries. We need to prioritize which countries are we going to have impact on. And when we use this system, it very quickly becomes apparent that, for example, in the case of yam, there are really 3 or 4 countries where we're going to have impact and where we need to invest and engage with the partners strongly. Once those countries are identified, the next step is to identify the institutes within those countries that we will partner with. So the default in most cases are the national systems. But as I mentioned a few minutes ago, advice we're getting from sub-regional organizations is we should also have our antennas out to identify universities or potentially seed companies that we could also engage with. So this slide is covering, how we define the networks and prioritize the countries and partners we need to work with. This information is uploaded into the breeding portal, and this is why this reporting into the breeding portal against all these sub-goals is very important. So this information has been pulled out recently from the breeding portal. So I apologize to the Cassava team. I know you probably have this information and you have assigned levels to the different countries, but at this current moment, it is not in the breeding portal, so it is not visible. And that's why it's so important for you to take that extra step of gathering the information from the various files and documents that you have and report it in this central database into the breeding portal so that it becomes visible to the management and it can become part of the reporting system at the end of the year. The example on the top is what has been pulled out from the breeding portal for beans. So you can see in East Africa, Southern Africa, the countries that are involved and the level of partnership that has been defined based on the hectareage or the value adjusted hectareage and the various institutes that are the partner organizations. In cassava, we know the countries that are there. We can infer from the hectareage what the level might be, but this is a decision that really the network needs to take based on other criteria. So Malawi, for example, has 255,000 hectares of cassava in this case, but perhaps the value adjusted area is over 1 million hectares. So it might be a level 1 country, but we would not know that. So this is the crop coordinators and the crop teams. Again, you need to do this. I know you have done it for cassava, but the next step is to make sure this information is uploaded into the breeding portal. Right. The second part of sub-goal 1, which is the biggest one, so don't worry, not all the sub-goals are going to take this long to explain. but it is to identify then the common goals. And as I alluded to previously, we have a robust system to do this. We have a scalable innovation to do this, and that is the product design team at a national level. So we're encouraging these product design team to be formulated and to have these meetings in all level 1 and level 2 network countries. They're multi-stakeholder discussions where the seed systems, processors, representatives from farmer groups from those countries come together. They define their market segments and define target product profiles for those particular market segments. So this exercise serves several purposes. Firstly, it is a truthing step. So for us in the CG, we already have active pipelines, right? We're not starting from scratch. We have pipelines, but it is a step to see what we are doing in the CG at a regional level. Does it really have relevance for what the country teams want, right? And that's a very important step. And we see a lot of changes arising out of this process once we've gone through this in the network at a network level. New market segments often come up. Some market segments are deprioritized. New traits emerge for certain market segments that sometimes the CG breeders were unaware of, but that national teams had a very good handle on. It is also a form of capacity development in itself. For many of the national teams, this is the first time they're actually sitting down with multidisciplinary teams trying to define market segments. It's the first time they're seeing what a target product profile looks like and how it is used. So by itself, it is a form of capacity development. And then it is transferring a lot of ownership also to the national partners. So the network members feel, okay, they've gone through a process, the information they've come up with and their views are now informing what the CGIAR is doing at a regional level. So these TPPs need to be endorsed by the NARS leadership. So this is a way of us, you know, as I mentioned, some of the common elements of partnership support is getting institutional support. So we need to get NARS leadership to endorse these TPPs. And once we have that, they need to be uploaded again to the breeding portal, the central point of reporting all of this information. And from there, it will be connected to GLOMIP. So this is a critical step that we have in identifying common goals. And of course, the final step of that is to gather all the information from each of the level 1 and level 2 country teams, have a regional meeting, and then agree on, aggregate all the information and agree on regional market segments and target product profiles based on the information coming from the country teams, the level 1 and level 2 country teams. And then the network jointly then prioritizes the market segments, which market segments to prioritize, and you know, what are the most important value propositions within each of those target product profiles to focus on. So I will now move on to the next set of sub-goals. So these are 2, 3, and 4. So quickly just refresh your memory of what we're talking about. So there's 2, 3, and 4. So joint advancement decisions, regional technical planning, and getting a better handle on the scaling mechanism for various networks in individual countries. So what we've done is we've tried to address all of these 3 sub-goals in one process, which is now the regional product advancement and planning meeting. So I'll go back to that slide. So I think one thing to point out is we're fully aware that, you know, this is not a new thing for many networks. Many networks have been running product advancement meetings already. And our intention here is to understand what has been going on, harvest the best practices from the different efforts that have been going on, get external guidance also from industry experts. For instance, this, you know, advancement meetings are routinely happening in industry. In fact, in industry, it is the most important operational meeting of the year. And with all this input, come up with a robust template that we can use to run a strong a regional advancement meeting for CG coordinated breeding networks. So we acknowledge it's not a new thing. What we're trying to do is harvest good practice and ways of working from various sources, including industry, to come up with a good, standardized, robust template. One thing to point out is before we can start discussing product advancement meetings, we need to go through that previous step of having those product design team meetings, aggregating them and coming up with regional market segments and target product profile. Because in an advancement meeting, you need to advance products according to a market segment using thresholds and values defined in a target product profile. So unless you have your market segments figured out and target product profiles defined, you cannot run an advancement meeting. That is a prerequisite. So the first step is what I just described earlier, sub-goal 1, to have these meetings to define market segments and target product profiles. That gives the teams then to align breeding pipelines towards those market segments. And then at a later point, that's when the networks will be ready then to have these product advancement and planning meetings. So these meetings are annual meetings, and they serve several critical functions where we try and bring various threads together in one common setting so that we can link all the various elements together. So within a breeding program, there might be groups gathering market intelligence. There's, of course, a group involved in scaling and seed systems. Other groups might be doing, discipline-specific research on pathology, pre-breeding, whatnot. And this is a venue where we're trying to bring everything together. So typically, we have an update on market intelligence in these meetings. So we're developing, as I said, this template, and we will have something available to share with the groups for review at the end of this month. Actually, before I go any further, I also want to acknowledge the strong support of CIAT and BEANS, because we piloted a draft agenda with the BEANS program in Eastern and Southern Africa in June. So thank you to Claire Mukankusi and Jean-Claude. I don't know if they're on the call, but thank you very much for allowing us to work with you on that exercise. And out of that have come many insights, which we're also using to refine the agenda and the template that we're developing for a regional product advancement meeting. But in these meetings, we will be getting updates on market intelligence. So bring that information in to make sure it is very well connected with the breeding efforts. We will be getting updates on the seed systems, on the regional seed system. So things like, are there new varieties that have been released that are doing very well? So are these the new checks, for instance, that we need to be thinking about in our breeding program? What is the status of product lifecycle management? So all the varieties that have been released in the last number of years, where are they? Are some ramping up? Have some reached saturation? Are some of our scaling partners even thinking about withdrawing and replacing some of those varieties? So we need to get those updates. We need to get an understanding of the status of the scaling partners. So that was, if you recall, sub-goal 4. So, if we don't have an effective scaling system, the network needs to make a decision. Is it worth continuing to invest in breeding, or do we transfer those resources towards trying to establish some kind of seed system or scaling mechanism? Based on information coming in, we have an opportunity then to review market segments and target product profiles. So if the market intelligence team tells us, oh, there's a new disease that's come up or something has changed, that gives us an opportunity to update the market segments and target product profiles. So we don't have to go through that process of having a PDT meeting again, a product design team meeting. Once it's done, the next step is to include aspects of that in the product advancement and planning meeting. The meat of the meeting then is obviously the advancement of germplasm between the stages. So getting an update on what is happening in the breeding pipelines and early stages of testing, observation, stage 1, stage 2, and then also getting an update on what is happening on the latest stages of testing. So regional testing, on-farm verification, registration, release, and eventual commercialization. And within this process, there are various roles and responsibilities. So different functions, disciplines have different roles. So breeders, for instance, very strong role early in the pipeline. The further we go downstream, then we have much more involvement from the seed systems, portfolio managers, seed companies, and so forth. but also we are defining the roles of various partners. So, well, what is the role of the CG? What is the role of national partners? What is the role of CG, of seed companies, for instance, in these advancement decisions? Um, the last two areas that we're trying to integrate into these advancement meetings are to track the operational status of the network. So to have a clear understanding of, how is the network operating? Do we have some locations, for example, that are consistently giving bad data? And, does the network have to make a decision to close that site and try and gather that data from another source, or, make decisions like that, and then take stock of the breeding status. So, for example, discuss, have input and endorsement from our partners on new breeding starts, for instance. So many of you might be thinking about implementing rapid cycle genomic selection hubs, right? So that's a topic that's been front and center for a couple of years now. But that involves often having a hub where a lot of that work is done, and that hub generally tends to be with a CGIAR center. But we need to be intentional about involving our NARS partners or other partners, because they also need to be part of that. And one way to be part of that is to have a discussion about the new breeding starts. As breeders, we know one of the most important decisions we make each year is the choice of parents in new breeding starts, right? So if we open up that discussion and have input and endorsement from our national partners, it is a way of ensuring that everyone is aware of what's going on. They've had an opportunity to participate. So although the actual work is being run in a centralized hub, additional partners have had an opportunity to contribute, and they're aware of what is going on. So again, this is how we are seeing it. We're working on a template that we want to share with all of you towards the end of the month. But as I've said several times, we acknowledge a lot of this work is ongoing in different forms. Some networks are having virtual meetings, some networks are having physical meetings, some networks do it internally within the CG, some are inviting partners. There are many different ways that this is being done. And industry, of course, has its own way of doing it, and we don't need to transfer all those things into a public system, because what the work we do is a little bit different. But what we're still trying to do is harvest all these best practices and come up with a robust system that will be of benefit to everyone. So that is sub goals 2, 3, and 4. I'll now go into 5, and this is the network membership agreements. Again, many of you are familiar with this. This is something that came up in 2021. So when we were writing the proposal for GI, many CG leaders and NARS leaders said, look, we need to have some clear and transparent ways of working at an operational level. We have the big MOUs where we agree that in principle we're working and we'll do this and that and establish offices and so on. But they said, look, at an operational level, we need some kind of network membership agreement. And it's not surprising. We are working in a very complex environment in each of the regions. We're working with many countries. Sometimes there are different languages in a small region. In East Africa, you could have French, Portuguese, English, and the national systems are at different levels. Sometimes they have different objectives. So it is fraught with uncertainty and risk. And sometimes it's good to have our ways of working well documented and transparent. We all think we have a plan and everything's going to work well until we're punched, and then suddenly everything is out of whack, and we're a bit of at a loss. So sometimes, for instance, we have very good collaboration with an individual person, and everything's based on verbal communication and understanding, and then that person moves on. Suddenly they're director of something at FAO or something, and then the new person comes in and there's no institutional memory, and they're not aware of the commitments and things that have been discussed and worked on for years prior to that. And that's why we've come up with a template for network membership agreements. These are available. We can share it with everyone. But some of the aspects that are covered in these agreements are things like, the use of common data management systems. So if you want to be part of the network, everyone commits, for example, to using EBS. Everyone commits to sharing market intelligence. So, we cannot develop accurate regional market segments and TPPs if some countries are not sharing market intelligence with the network. Commitment to return data on time, so that data can be used in advancement meetings, for example. So these are some of the practical things that are covered in these agreements. The agreements also do indicate and outline terms of reference for a cross-institutional steering committee. So again, we're very much aware that almost all networks have a steering committee. What we're proposing is to be a little bit more intentional about having cross-institutional representation in that, and also having cross-discipline representation in that. So not just having breeders, but having seed systems and other relevant disciplines part of that committee. So it should be lean, it should be effective. We don't want to add just another layer of bureaucracy, but this steering committee it should have some teeth. It should have some ability to guide resource allocation in a transparent way that all the members can see how this is being done and they can participate in those discussions. It should have some oversight over other things such as dispute resolution and so on. So at this point, I just want to highlight that, you know, this is work that's been going on for a few years, and we actually have two networks that have headed this effort. The first one is the Africa RTB network, and really appreciate the support of Hugo and Vish and Ishmael and others who've driven this within the RTB community. So RTB Africa, they've signed these network membership agreements committing to many of these things, using the same data management system, same nomenclature, and so forth. And it has been signed at the very highest level by the DGs or DDGs of the respective institutions, including the CGIAR institutes, so IIT and SIP, that are part of these networks. And having that institutional backing, again, is very critical for having strong partnerships. The other network that's made a lot of progress in this is the ATSIM CIMMYT network, who have established regional network membership agreements for the dryland crops, and that includes ICRISAT at the moment as well. So congratulations to those two particular networks, and you know, for all the other networks, we're willing and ready to work with you to share the templates and support you on the next steps to get them signed. Right, so I'll go now to sub-objective 6, and then the last one is 7, and then I will stop. So 6 is dealing with costing. So again, you know, as I mentioned at the start, a lot of the things I've talked about, many of them are familiar to you, but strengthening partnerships, capacity development, building the networks, it's an iterative process. And as we start to do some things, new opportunities open up. So, you know, as we did in the past, assessments of partner programs, and then identifying roles they could play within networks, then we need to identify, okay, so if they're playing a bigger role, you know, what kind of budget do they need? So then that, you know, brings costing into play then. And that's why some of these things are new. And as we continue building networks, you know, additional things are going to pop up. So costing is one of these things. As I mentioned, you know, the Gates Foundation in particular, funding a lot of our work, are also asking about this information. They want to know how much it's going to cost to fund a pipeline in a certain region for particular market segments or breakthrough products. And so it's important to develop those budgets, to allocate resources, you know, going through that exercise of costing. It's very reflective. Often we identify high cost centers that, you know, the teams were unaware of. When we started this work 2 years ago, there wasn't actually the only standard publicly available breeding costing tool was one that was developed by the University of Queensland. And so we have actually worked with 6 networks, some of you might be on this call, to cost out the operations both of the CGIAR and the partner members. But as those of you who have been part of that process will appreciate, it is not a very scalable approach, because this tool can be a little bit cumbersome, and it's not always customized for the way we work in public breeding in the global south. So as a result, over the last few months, we are transitioning to an Excel-based costing tool that is being developed by Lenin Muzundire and Marianne Banzinger, who've been working closely with costing. And so they're developing an Excel-based costing tool that has numerous advantages. So firstly, it is much simpler to use. You don't need to download software, get the updates, fix bugs, all that kind of stuff. It's much easier to use. It's an Excel-based tool. It is customized to our needs, to the CGIAR and partner needs. And critically, we have freedom to operate now with this tool. So it's under development. It will be finalized by the end of this month, and then we'll organize a webinar in late Q3. But the idea then is to transition all the jobs that are currently on the University of Queensland tool to this new Excel-based tool. It'll be more easier to use, so it is more scalable, and many of the teams will be able to use the tools independently once they've received a little bit of training. And that is important because, as many of you know, you're constantly being requested for this information now by particularly the Gates Foundation and other funders as you're going through this cycle of project renewal and budget development. So this is an important sub-objective, and you will get updates on this in a few weeks' time. Okay, now this is the final sub goal for number 7, and this is ensuring that we have roles and responsibilities defined for partners, and critically that they are also funded adequately so that they can fulfill their network roles and obligations. So I think we just need to recognize as the CG that, you know, often we receive the funding from funders, but the funders are expecting us to be working at a regional level. So, you know, the Gates Foundation might fund a CG center in Kenya. That's not because they just want something to happen in Kenya. The assumption is we are coordinating then a regional effort, and, you know, Tanzania, Ethiopia, all these other countries are involved. But it's easier for the funders to work with us in the CG. It reduces their transaction costs. It supports our mandate as regional coordinators of research. And of course, we have a strong track record of delivery, and you know, the numbers of return on investment and so on speak for themselves. But the expectation is it's not just for the CGIAR. The expectation is we're engaging a broader selection of partners to do things that perhaps we don't have a mandate to do. So scaling, for instance, or gathering market intelligence, potentially conducting on-farm testing and things like that. Or doing things where they have developed a comparative advantage. So they might even have strong breeding pipelines for particular market segments that the CGIAR could potentially pull back on and allow NARS partners to lead that effort, provided that material is available to regional partners. So, you know, the recent thinking coming from the Gates Foundation, I keep mentioning them because they're the big funders of breeding in Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, is that there's an expectation that we need to demonstrate that at least 20% of project funds are flowing through to regional crop network partners, and that they're flowing through in an intentional and strategic way. So it's not that, okay, this is the 20% of funds, we have 5 partners, let's just divide it by 5 and then hand over the money. No, we need to be a little bit more intentional about that and identify within those partners that we work with who has a comparative advantage to do what. And this is often defined through a standardized assessment that many of you are familiar with. So based on those assessments, we know that some partner programs are stronger in delivery or breeding, and then the network has to agree and decide that, okay, because of that, the network is committing to providing additional funds to that particular partner because they have the capacity to run a breeding network. Other partners might not be there yet, and their focus might still be on trialing and testing, evaluating material, and releasing products. So this is something that we need to think about and be a lot more intentional about how we're sub-granting to partners and being strategic about choosing the partners and the level of investment that they are receiving. And of course, the level of investment that they receive links back to sub-objective 6, which is the costing. So that's why they also need to be costed, because we say, okay, we're going to scale up the breeding efforts in this particular national system. This is the amount of money that needs to be transferred. So I'll end on this slide because I've spoken a lot, probably a little bit too much. Sorry about that. But it's very difficult sometimes to synthesize all this work that is going on in network development and breeding partnerships just by talking about it. And sometimes you might have 3 minutes with a funder or an important donor, and you're trying to convince them or convey the level of work that you're doing. And these network summary tables are what we find a very effective way of doing this. So I've borrowed this particular one from the Western Central Africa ADSIN Pearl Millet Network. It's an excellent example of a summary network table. I thank Inusa Drabo and Harish Gandhi, who are leading that effort in West Africa. And what they've done here is they've gone through the various steps that I've described. So they've identified their key country partners, and in almost all of them, the key institution they're working with is the national system. So they've identified that they've prioritized the country membership. Together with those country teams through the PDTs and regional aggregation, they've defined market segments, and these market segments are now uploaded into the breeding portal, and they're then connected to GLOMIP. So they've defined jointly the market segments. They have prioritized those market segments then, and they've defined, what market segments CIMMYT will breed for and what will be spillover. So I think there's 7 market segments in total. CIMMYT is breeding for 3. Another 4 are going to be a spillover. So they're relatively small, and they can test products coming out of those other pipelines. And critically, they've now gone in and identified and defined the roles and responsibilities for each of these country NARs for each of those market segments. So you can see here, Burkina Faso have a strong comparative advantage in breeding. They have a breeding program that's rated at a tier 2.2B. And so the blue signifies that they are receiving network funds to contribute to breeding for that regional market segment. So Burkina Faso, in this case, contributing to 2 market segments. They're breeding, they're receiving funding for 2 market segments. Many of the other countries are focused on testing. So they're testing and releasing, which is also a viable strategy. And that is reflective of, the importance of the crop. If they don't have a huge hectarage, there's no point establishing a breeding program. But also, if the capacity of the breeding program is limited, then they're better off just doing testing, very good testing, and releasing of that product. So this is an excellent example from the ADSIN Pearl Millet network, and we're hoping that we can get to this point with all the networks that we're working with, and that eventually we can extract these summary tables also from the breeding portal. So for that reason, it's very important that you continuously update the portal with priority countries, the market segments, and also the level of investments that are going into each of those breeding efforts from each of those individual partners. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I will hand it back to you, Michael, maybe to help moderate. And I apologize if I've gone a little bit over, but I hope it was clear. Yeah, happy to take any questions and concerns. Yeah, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bish. Thanks very much for that fantastic and detailed presentation. Okay, so questions or statements and discussion points. So here's the important part of our session where we get to knock this around and discuss it a little bit. So anyone has any thoughts or questions, please please jump in or put your hand up. Sean, yeah, lots of comments in the comments field. So good
I
to
was
hear from
like,
you.
I was figuring it out as Bish was like going through it, but I just want to make sure like we're using the default priority index to assign like the country levels. Is that the case? So like I go to GLOMIP, filter for my crop, and then basically use whatever default values are set for priority index, or is that not the case?
So Sean, you're talking about the values, where to get the values to determine the levels, like the hectarage.
Yeah, because like if I went to impact opportunity, for example, I think they just have like a 0.20 equal weight across, it looks like 4 categories for
So I
nutrition and
think if I'm
health.
not mistaken, and yeah, maybe Peter, Marianne, Michael, you can correct me, but I think the information in GlowMip is accurate, and it is a 3-year average. So that's what we're using, a 3-year average of FAO data. So if you want to see
Could I show you really,
Yeah.
can I share so I can show people what I'm talking about? Is
yeah,
it, okay. So like,
Marianne's very familiar with Marianne's got your hand up. While you're switching that, Sean, maybe we hear from her and she can help clarify.
Sean, no, Bish distributed a priority setting template, and we made an update every year. So
okay,
it's easier if Bish circulates the priority setting up, that it contains the data from GlowMip. It's the same data, yeah. And so you can use that. Bish can circulate it to the people on this call, yeah. So you can, that's easier, much more straightforward. It's not the priority index because
okay,
we originally, I mean, that was a debate in the Transform team. What should we use? We first used area, and then came the feedback. Well, but these crops have different values. I mean, for example, banana is a much more valuable crop than cowpea per hectare. So we can't. So we were using we generated the value adjusted area. Yeah, and you find that in Bish's template. So Bish, I suggest you circulate that after this.
and this is updated from what Michael distributed when we were in Dubai, correct? Because I remember I have a paper somewhere with like a formula basically. So I think you guys were trying to be transparent about
There
how
are
you're.
two things. There are two things, Sean. There was the priority setting in terms of the resource allocation by crop. Yeah, that is
Okay.
where a group experimented with priority setting index. Yeah, but this is that was more about resource allocation, and it received feedback in Dubai. Yeah.
Okay.
And Peter is leading the efforts to say how do we do this in the forthcoming cycle. What Bish is talking about is quite simple criteria to say in which country should we invest. I mean, when we started, people felt they have to invest in all the countries. We are a public organization. We need to treat them equally. And then the Transform team and the center contacts discussed what should be criteria. And the criteria actually came, and that is a different question. It's not how much you invest, but it's a question, should we invest in a particular country in breeding, or should we invest just in testing? And the PowerPoint that Bish showed shows now the criteria. And there is an accompanying Excel file that gives you quite quick answer to both the value adjusted or just the area. You get both values. You get also the other development indicators that we circulated and defined together with Bert, that these are the more robust ones in terms of the development indicators. So Bish will circulate the template, and you can see whether there are questions. We can follow up that in future.
Yeah, like the template and the network membership agreement are like, if you can send those soon, that would be great. As soon as I get the template, I'll add a level assignment in Breeding Portal. I wasn't sure if we had all agreed on like an objective process of assigning levels yet, but it sounds like there is some agreed
do have
approach to
a
this.
process. Yeah. So I'll
Okay.
send you 2 files. Well, to everybody, those 2 files. So there's that
Yeah.
tool, the prioritization of the country based on the hectarage or value adjustment, and then the draft network membership agreements. So they
Okay.
will come through to you.
Thank you. That was useful. I appreciate the time today.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Sean. Anything else that's not particularly clear to people? Anything that concerns any of you in making progress with this or moving forward in this way? Don't be shy. Do all of you feel like it's well understood? You,
Hello, Bish. Hi, Michael.
hi, Flavio. Nice
Flavio.
to see you.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm following all
Good
the
evening.
ideas.
I'm calling for Louisa. Did you finish with Louisa? I'm the husband of Louisa. Almost
Sorry.
finished?
Can
Okay, okay. You
Can
will
I
try
go?
to
Might need to mute
retrieve
him,
the
Michael.
drive.
Might need to mute
I
him.
don't think that's for us. I'm going to mute him. Okay. Sorry, Flavio.
It's
I
interesting
don't think
enough.
that's for us.
Okay. I'll try to make my comment. Well, the comment is just maybe we are not totally up to date with all the recommendations that you guys are making, and they are all great. The question is the pressure we are under for fundraising. It's taking so much of our time that it's difficult to dedicate to those aspects of great management of the pipelines. And I understand that they are connected to fundraising too, but it's not like presenting an excuse, but just to say that it doesn't mean that we are not giving due value to what all the B4T and accelerated breeding is proposing, but I have the feeling, I am new to the system, but I have the feeling that the fraction of time that we are dedicating to fundraising now is really above average historically, because we are not getting almost any core funding, right? So just a comment, just say that we might be better off. We might be more up to date with all those methodologies if we had a little more time and we were not dedicating so much of our time to fundraising right now. What's your view about that?
Well, first, we're well aware that that there's a stronger need as ever for fundraising, and that breeding teams are really doing it tough. And we're aware that this means that a lot of time is being taken up with fundraising. Beyond making the statement that we are aware in terms of trying to provide a solution for how to make progress with everything else that needs to be done, including these goals. I think we'll try and move that to outer scope for this conversation, and try and keep this about ensuring that the goals are well understood, and more technical discussion around how to move forward with it. That's not to dismiss it. It's largely to say I don't have an answer for you right now, and it's a challenge, and we're aware of this.
Yeah, I would complement just to say that all those methodologies, I think within the scope of this discussion is that it must be something that doesn't take a lot of time. So it's nice to invest in developing tools that are friendly and easy to use for the teams. So we could do it properly without having to dedicate an amount of time that we may not have now under this situation that we are under so much pressure for fundraising. Just a comment.
Yeah, no, it's acknowledged. Thank you. And like you say, I think some of these things are about, I mean, if you've got the awareness and understanding of a different way of doing things, it can be a matter of when you're with those partners and you're doing it a certain way. Sometimes it can be a case of doing it a different way that may not necessarily take more time, that may not necessarily take more resources. And in terms of resources, indeed, this many of these approaches are being developed with a strong understanding that resources are becoming increasingly tight. And so this is largely about also working together with with our partners in a more efficient way, and to better to work together in a more effective and more efficient way, and to pool resources. Many of these partners have their own breeding programs, their own breeding ambitions, and it's about aligning with those country needs. It's about pooling those resources, and it's about putting their capacity that they have in terms of particularly staff and sometimes infrastructure to use for the benefit of their own country, because many times they have resources, staff and infrastructure that is not able to be well utilized because they lack operating funds. And so it's about marrying the operating funds of the CG with their capacity to work together to hopefully make better use of available resources. But I understand at the same time that it takes time to sit together and work through exactly how to do that. And yeah, I mean, I all I can say there is to when you are sitting with them, to try and think of these approaches. And I know that time is tight, because time is one of the valuable resources, and resources are tight when funding is tight.
Thanks, Michael.
If I could just add to that, Michael, yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, like, as Michael said, we're fully understanding and appreciative of the situation. And we understand this year, yeah, many things may not be achieved, but there are some things that are a little bit less effort. So, for example, helping to review some of these templates that are coming out. I mean, it may not take a huge amount of staff time. That would be very helpful. You might find still some things could be helpful even for you as you are renewing your project. So, for example, costing, for instance, if the Gates Foundation renewal requires some information about costing, maybe that is something you might be interested to engage with. And yeah, we fully understand everything cannot be done because of the unique situation, but they might still be some things you want to cherry pick, which can help you with the most important thing, which is to renew the grants.
Thanks, Bish.
And I welcome comments from others that have far more management experience than I do. I mean, there's some individuals here that I draw upon regularly that have a lot of senior management experience, both in the CG and in the private sector. If any of you want to jump in with some comments to Flavio's statement, they're welcome as well. Or any other questions? Well, Bish, I think you must have nailed it and just been super clear.
Absolutely clear. I've confused everyone totally, which also happens sometimes. But I'll just there's something on the text, so I'll try and respond to that. This from Moses. So we will support you, Moses. So the Transform Enable team will support you to transfer from the university. I think this is your question, how to transfer from the University of Constantinople to the new method. So because we've been with you in that process, so we will support you in that. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, that's the one question I see there. Yeah, back to you, Michael.
Sure. Sean again.
Yes. Sorry, there's a question that came up in the chat about clustering like neighboring countries or regions to hit the mark, like the cutoff, the 20 or 250,000 hectare kind of threshold that we're discussing. I had a similar question, but yeah, somebody put that in the chat.
Bish, I'll let you have a go. I'll share my thoughts, and then Bish, I'll let you come in. So when it comes to a regional or sub-regional market segment, indeed, these cut across country borders, and that makes sense to do so. When it comes to prioritizing what partners you're working with and at what level you're working with them, and what capacity they may, try and understand what capacity they may or may not have, or resources they may be able justifiably put in. Then it starts to become more about the criteria that Bish has set, and indeed largely to do with the size and importance of the crop in that country, because you're working with that particular partner. And so even if they're partners in the neighboring country, there's a lot of that crop grown, that doesn't necessarily change the situation for that specific partner in the country in question. And similarly when it comes to scaling as well. I mean, so those comments are more to do with breeding, but when it comes to scaling and partnering for release and so on, a similar sort of thing. I mean, it's the scaling typically gets done within country, and so it's important to look at what's going on within country. Bish, I don't know if you want to add to my thoughts on that.
I think that was very clear, Michael. I mean, I'm totally aligned with that. Yeah. So, at the regional level, we will aggregate and know that, but, at a country level, we do need to know which countries to invest in and where the capacity exists. So as you said, we need to understand that country capacity and the importance of that country in that network. So yeah, totally aligned.
Peter.
So my comment in relation to Flavio's comments is, I think we need to have an overall strategy. We need to be able to explain how we develop that strategy, how we prioritized components of that strategy. And with that, then we can go to funders and say, here's opportunity for you to make an investment into this larger strategy that we have. And so to me, it's changing our approach from, our breeding effort is the sum of projects to we have a breeding strategy of which projects fit into it strategically. And we're working with funders to make sure that we get the funding and we can show those funders that their dollars are going where they're going to have the biggest impact, or their dollars are going where the funders say they would like to see their dollars being spent. So to me, I'd like to think we all have the overarching strategy, and when we're having discussions with funders, we're having the discussion to say, this is how your funding can fit into the strategy that we've developed. We've done the effort to prioritize. We're willing to recognize any unique areas of focus that you as a funder have, and this is how your funds would fit into what we're doing in total. So, to me, we need to have this in place. We need to be using it as we have discussions with funders to say, this is how your contribution is contributing to our overall strategy of developing better product. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, good comments. Thank you, Peter. All right, I think we've exhausted all the conversation to be had. Thank you, Bish. This has been excellent. And I think we can move along. So that is the end of the deep dives on the 7 goals for crop teams. We can have a deep dive on what you can expect from the cross-cutting team. We have our own set of goals that we've set for ourselves for the team that are working across centres and crops to provide support, coordination, leadership in this space. So we can present those. Also, importantly, the harmonised crop report, which we spoke about during the Dubai meeting and have been working hard at, and Marianne Banzinger has been working hard at with Scriptoria to get that developed and ready. That is now ready, and so we will be launching that, and I'll put that on the calendar for this same time next Wednesday. I'll do that shortly, and so you'll get to learn all about that next week. So I look forward to seeing you all there, those of you who are able to make it, and I find that super exciting. I'm very excited to that is ready and that we're able to launch that. So with that, I say goodbye and give you back 15 minutes to your day. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you, Bish.
Bye, Michael.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow.
Bye.